I bet you're wondering what a pack of cards has got to do with guitar making. It's a pack of cards given to me by Troy Donackley, a great friend of ours, Troy from Nightwish, about to embark on a 16-month world tour. This is some of his cards. I'm going to put a clamp on either end to hold all the cards together. I can't bend it. That's because all the cards are clamped tightly, they won't slide. Take one of the clamps off, all of a sudden they will bend. Now you will notice as they bend, the end does not stay level. The end goes at an angle. That's because the outside layers need to be getting longer while the inside layers need to be getting shorter. The outside ones are being stretched, the inside ones are being compressed. That's what happens when you bend wood. And of course, if the bending goes wrong, then you get a crack. In fact, that's exactly what goes wrong when you bend a guitar side. That's been bent in exactly the same way as those pack of cards have been bent, and the layers have come apart because it wasn't pliable enough, it wasn't in a state where it wanted to be bent. I can talk a bit more about that particular piece a bit later on. So we're going to bend a piece of wood. This is a thick piece. It will bend under engineering conditions, a few thousandths of an inch or hundredths of a millimetre, if you put enough load on it. A thinner piece of wood will bend much more easily. This is about the thickness of a violin side, and it bends very easily indeed. But it doesn't stay there, it goes back. By using heat and moisture, the heat will turn the moisture into steam. The steam will go through the wood and take the heat through the wood, loosen all the bonds between the fibres, between the playing cards, and all between the elements of the grain and the cells of the wood. Loosen all those and allow them just to slide past each other, so when we bend it, it stays there. This is a bending iron which is hot, and we can bend a piece of wood just by doing that. It will stay there. A thicker piece of wood is not quite so easy. Guitar sides, the way we work anyway, tends to be 2.2 millimetres for Indian rosewood, 2.4 millimetres for walnut, and if we use a different timber which is heavier, stiffer, denser, we'll make it thinner still. We can't go as thin as the 1 millimetre or so for a violin side. It wouldn't be strong enough for the guitar, and if there's any sort of deviation from flatness along that way, then we wouldn't be able to sand it flat. So we have to have a certain amount of strength and a certain amount of body in the wood to be able to make a flat side strong enough to support all the tensions that are going to be in it. So I'm going to demonstrate, I hope, how we actually bend bits of wood here in the workshop. I'm going to ask Paul just to go get these wet for me, please. Just soak those for me. Before we start there, I'm going to point something out to you. I don't know if you can see along that edge of those pair of sides. It's a straight line. On the other edge, it's not a straight line. The reason for that, when the guitar sides have been bent, the front of the guitar is more or less flat, not quite, but more or less flat. The back is a curve. So where the curve comes down to certain different parts of the curve of the sides, the height ends up being slightly different. Many guitar makers will start off with a piece of wood that's straight on the edge, bend it into this shape, and then find that they have to carve off a lot from there, a lot from here, even more from there, leave that sticking up, get that exactly straight. But if you anticipate before you start what the shape is going to be, i.e. that straight there, that straight line, not straight line, when you bend it, that back surface will follow the finished shape of the guitar, and you've got less work to do working on that edge. So here we go. Because of what I was explaining about these fibres of the wood easily cracking open, it helps quite a lot to have some support under places where the wood is going to be bent to stop the fibres coming out. So I'm going to put these two sides in with the two straight sides together, like that. And I'm going to put them in just the right place. I'll show you how. This is a template for the shape of the sides. And on the template I've got a line marked as a datum. On the side of the bending former here there's a little notch. If I put that datum on the notch and put the wood equally left and right of that datum, then the side will bend and the bend will be in the right position. So here we go. I start applying pressure to the top of the wood, slowly. I'll leave it there for a moment so the heat can work its way through. The steam is being generated. The sheet, the stainless steel sheet underneath, is stopping the heat and the moisture from escaping. It's also supporting the fibres of the wood. So we've got the heat from the top penetrating to the bottom. The inside and the outside are being heated very closely together. The outside fibres are being stopped from stretching. The inside fibres are being pushed up against this aluminium shape, which stops those compressing. When it gets to the bottom, just clamp it up and that's done. This is Claro walnut. It's one of the easiest woods in the world to bend. It doesn't need much heat, it doesn't need much water, it doesn't need much pressure. And you can see the line from where it's wet to dry, where it's evaporated. That's going to move along as the heat goes through the wood. I can go a lot faster than this, I know it'll go fine, but I'm going to take it slow. And you'll see the moisture line moving further around towards my fingers as the wood dries out. It won't dry out completely until I get all the way around. The wood will only bend when it's hot. So you have to wait for the heat to move to the place where you're bending. I'm bending here. I'm not bending there, that's already bent. That's got hot. That is just heating up now. That part is bending. Now that part's bending. Now that part's bending. As the wood gets hot, the bend takes place. This is a really easy piece of wood to bend. And this is a clever bit about this particular device. All I have to do is wedge it in place and it's done. Same this end. Now, finished. I'm going to leave that turned on. I'll leave it heating, maybe 5 minutes. It doesn't need to be much longer than that. That will dry out all the moisture and even some of the resin in the wood. When I turn it off or take the wood out, it will stay almost entirely in the shape it's meant to be. Can somebody get me the jumbo mould? Thank you. Now, back to this piece of wood, why that's cooling down. This went horribly wrong. That's Brazilian rosewood, but not a very good piece. It's slab sawn, so the grain is not vertical, the grain is that way. And you can see where, in effect, the layers of the grain have peeled away. If that had been bent more slowly and been supported on the outside by, say, a piece of stainless steel, that would have prevented the lines from falling apart. It's happened here as well. And on its little friend, its mate, it's happened on the waist. This piece of wood is basically impossible to bend. It has probably been kiln dried. It's probably been too dry to actually tackle. The darker parts on that is not burn, not technically. That is the resin in the wood that's sort of boiling off. It's the resin that's burning, not the wood itself. And that tends to go black. Brazilian rosewood and Indian rosewood have a lot of oils in them. In fact, Indian rosewood used to be distilled to make rosewood oil for cosmetics. It's far better being used for guitars. Yeah. But in the end, we end up with sides such as that. Another two pieces of wood, two matching pieces, again cut to shape. I'm going to do exactly the same thing with that. It'll take longer. The smells will be different. The vapour coming off will be different. That's the mould that the wood is going to be tucked into eventually. See? It's swinging back a little bit, not much. Boom, boom. Now they are not exact. When they've cooled down a little bit, we're going to go to the next stage and I'll get Paul to do a bit of the bending just to tweak those so that they're a bit closer to the final shape. At the moment, they're pretty good actually, but they could be a little bit better. Now the final shape depends upon all sorts of things. If you can get with that camera over here, if you can see the shape here, the bends go further in than parallel. In the finished guitar, that will be parallel to that. Each of these bends is a bit tighter than it needs to be. So when it springs open a little bit at the end, it'll be nearer to the exact shape. Different woods respond differently. Different temperatures have different results. Different speed of bending has different results. The first guitars I ever made I used a model steam engine, the boiler for a model steam engine, which is shaped a bit like that, but with the valve and the chimney underneath, a methylated spirit burner, methylated spirits burner underneath it to heat the top. And bit by bit, the wood was pulled around it until we got to the shape we wanted. A bit later on, I bought a violin bending iron, not dislike this one. This is commercially available. It's a more modern version. That isn't a thermostat, that's a regulator. It regulates the amount of energy being put into the heaters inside this aluminium beam. There's no temperature feedback to get the temperature right. This one is one I've made with a temperature controller on it, so that as you use it, the temperature is regulated and stays much the same. Now the issue here is, if I'm using this one and bending wood against it, the faster I work, the more water I use, the more heat is being taken away from that. And if I have a fan on the bench trying to keep myself cool, that's taking heat away from that. And that will cool the iron down. So after half an hour of intensive work, the iron will have got a lot colder than it was to start with. And you really need enough heat. Water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. We have this set typically at about 200. Because we work quickly, it takes the heat away quickly, and the actual working temperature on the surface is probably more like about 150 most of the time. So this is it's a lot more sophisticated, but it's still not exactly scientific. It's still under the control of the person doing it, how fast you work, how much pressure you put on, how often you put water on, and we do use water. If the wood is particularly stiff or particularly stubborn, then we add water by means of the, you'll recognise what this is, of course, adding water to the wood as required, and you'll see what's required here. Indian rosewood. It's a funny wood because you actually don't need water. It will bend dry. There's enough resin in Indian rosewood nearly every time to bend it without adding water. For a long time in the 1970s, that's exactly what we did, because it meant you could see what you were doing. You weren't covering it all up with moisture marks. Okay. Same thing applies. I've got the stainless steel sheet underneath to support the waist, and I'll start applying pressure. Now, if I was worried about bending the wood, if the wood was very figured, if it's a little bit too stiff, I might add another sheet of stainless steel on the top which supports the outside surface. I'm not doing that here because most of the time it isn't necessary. Most of the time this works perfectly well. We wind it down slowly. You see already the top surface is drying out. I know that rosewood isn't going to bend as easily as the walnut did, so to stop it drying out too quickly, I'm going to apply more water, inside in particular, where it's in contact with the hot aluminium, and I'll carry on bending. I'm not rushing. I dare say I could wind that down without pausing. I'm not going to. There's no reason to. Again, you can see it getting some marks where the moisture is being cooked out. The smell is glorious. Same again. It's a bit slow. I can feel it stiffer. I'll put the pressure on there. Bit by bit, I can feel it giving way. On the walnut I bent, it happened almost instantly. This is taking a while. I can feel it giving way. I can see the moisture moving along as the wood dries. This bending former is the second one I made. I made this about 1975. The first one was a slightly smaller size for what we call the standard. This is a jumbo or dreadnought size. The first one was made from an aluminium casting. This one is made from a piece of aluminium that was bent to the shape I wanted. Inside this, I think, are a number of straight element heaters, straight bars screwed on the inside. The one in front of me over there is heated with a silicone blanket glued to the inside. Again, that was made by bending a piece of aluminium. This one has three different areas of control. There's two up here. There's our thermostats. One controlling the top part of the bending, the upper bounce, one controlling the lower bounce, and the third one here controlling the waist. So three different sections, each with individual temperature control. On a more difficult piece of wood, I couldn't do that quickly. I'd have to take my time and really feel the wood giving way. This is a piece of sapele. Not the easiest wood to bend. It's the same texture, weight, density, stiffness as Indian rosewood, very close. But it tends to be very dry. It's got no natural oils inside at all. And if you try and bend it a little bit too fast, that's what happens. So that is scrap. That would make a mandolin. It's not completely scrap. That starts to happen. Sometimes you can catch it in time before it's gone too far and you can sand that out. Generally speaking, once that happens, you've got a problem. It started to go a little bit on the inside as well. So that bit of wood will be just too stiff. And it tends to be when the wood has been kiln dried or kiln dried a little bit too much. So we don't kiln dry the sides here. We kiln dry on the backs. Very important they'll be dry enough, but the sides we don't. We allow them to have as much natural moisture and resin content and oil as we can possibly have. I'm going to leave that a little bit longer. It'll take a bit longer to set. In fact, I'm going to turn it off. I'll turn the heat off. You'll notice that we always use a trip because moisture and electricity do not mix. If I left that to cool down now and took it out in, say, an hour, it won't spring back at all. It will stay exactly the same shape as the mould, which might be, in this case, a bit too much because we've overbent it. Over the years, I've made these formers and modified them bit by bit to try and get the situation where the shape as the wood comes off the mould ends up the same shape as the wood when it's in the mould. That's what's supposed to happen. Paul, if you want to bend put the bender in your vise and get it turned on. The other things that we need to bend are bindings and purflings. Here we have a little selection. The single pieces of wood, about 6 by 2 millimeters, are the bindings. And we have a huge variety. These are just, I think we have about 80 different hardwood species, rare hardwoods. That is sycamore, that is myrtle, snakewood, ebony, bur-yew, suricote, koa, tulip wood, macassar ebony, pear. This piece, the bur-yew, you'll notice it looks like bur-yew on the top. On the back it's black. That's because I've glued a thin veneer of black, what is it, sycamore I think, to the back, because if I try and bend that, it'll crack, it'll break at every single little wobble in the grain, every burr, every flame in its end bit will crack, it will be impossible to bend. So we put a sacrificial veneer on one side which holds it all together so that the wood does not fall apart when we bend it. If I bend it this way though, it probably will. Here we go, because it's not being supported. If I push too hard on this side, it will break as well. In fact, let's test it. There you go. Asking a bit too much. It needs to be hot, it needs to be wet in order to enable it to bend. So that's a little trick used. These are bindings that have had little lines of purfling glued to them. There's another one there somewhere. There you go. I bought these in. We don't do it that way. If we want to put a line on the edge of the binding, we bend it separately, which is a really tricky job to do, but it does enable us to choose from anything we want. We have yellow there, red, there's some blue in there somewhere, black, white. We can make up whatever combination of bindings and purfling we want to use. So we don't have to have it ready-made in quantities of 50 or 100. We can do it one at a time. Now, the difficulty with this particular stuff, it's all very well bending it round the outside, that way, which goes on the front or on the back, but when we need to bend it that way to go on the edges of the guitar, it's very difficult indeed to bend, and Paul will show you a little bit about that in a minute. Something that we do, and I don't think anybody else does. Incredibly hard to do, but that's okay. Of course, there's a lot more to it than that, particularly if you get to things like this with a cutaway. This is rather more tricky to bend. You'll see a lot of guitars with a rounded cutaway that goes all the way around there and comes around here. There's reasons for doing it that way, there's reasons for doing it this way. This is the reason, this is the way that I like to do it. What I call a pointy cutaway, which is actually quite square. It's not the same shape as that. It's coming a lot sharper and then meets the cutaway part at 90 degrees. Lots of technical reasons why that happens, but I'll come back to that. To do that, we have to bend it rather more severely. And this is another bending former, the same principle as the one you've seen, but it has the cutaway part built into it. So when we put the wood in, we can bend it as normal, or we can pull it around here, that way. I won't demonstrate this working because it's plugged in at the moment, but that's the principle, and we can lock it in place that way, and we can hold the wood down at either end in exactly the same way with these wooden dowels. Now, something else that's worth pointing out is sharp curves are difficult to bend. Lots of makers would use something similar to this in a way, a wooden mould with a heater blanket on it, which might be something like that. Or it might be a metal surface with heaters inside, sometimes big light bulbs to heat the surface up, and you bend the wood around the heated surface. You could use a heater mass, which is glued to the outside of the mould. You put the wood on, and for a very, very tight bend, you can do this. You can put a bending strap on, pull it tight, really tight, and bend slowly. That really restrains the outside fibres from opening out and breaking away. And you can take as long as you like, put lots of pressure on, clamp it down at any point. Lots of ways of doing this. There are lots of YouTube clips of people doing it different ways. They all follow the same set of principles with different combinations of stainless steel sheets, heated blankets, layers of cloth, layers of paper, all sorts of things. Like that one. Now we're going to move over to Paul's bench now, where we're just about hot enough. Right, Paul here is just correcting, tweaking we call it normally, correcting the wood I just bent a moment ago on the former. It isn't exactly right. If I spent another 10 years modifying those bending formers, I could probably make them exactly right. But there's a limit to how much can be put in. The important thing here is to, first of all, identify where you've got to bend it. It isn't always that apparent. If you bend it in one place, straightening it out, it'll make the bit of wood a bit further up, straighten out a bit too much, particularly around the waist. And where it transitions from a curve in one direction to a curve in the other direction, it's quite difficult to get it so it looks really smooth. What Paul is doing here is heating up the main area here, then working it along, so the bit that's bending is this bit. You sometimes see people in videos sawing the wood backwards and forwards. They say they're trying to heat it up evenly. It's completely pointless. You've got to try and get the wood hot before you apply any real pressure to it. Otherwise it won't bend. You've got to be incredibly well controlled, sensitive, but there's quite a lot of effort involved. This is the easiest wood in the world to bend. Now, it's lovely if the wood fits the mould exactly. If from a real practical point of view, it can never be that exact. As long as you can pull it in place with the light touch of your fingers, I'm perfectly happy with that. If we leave it overnight, we'll come back next morning, it will have changed. If we get it wet, it'll tend to make the curves close up in the next half an hour or so. If you get it dry, they'll open out for the next half an hour or so. So there isn't a perfect situation. There always will be some stress left in the timber. It's a question of trying very hard to get it as close as you can without getting paranoid about it. Paul is adding water where he needs to have a bit of assistance, and he's breathing in nice water vapour. Yes, wonderful. If that was Indian rosewood or Brazilian rosewood, even better, I'd be doing it instead because I love the smell. I'm now going to go to the Indian rosewood I put into this form a little while ago and take it out. it hasn't moved very much at all. The other one didn't move much. This one moved even less. And when we take it out and try it in the mould, it's going to be pretty close to the final shape. Having bent these two pieces, with a bit of luck, the grain will match on the end, which is the way it's supposed to be. Sometimes it goes wrong when you bend them the wrong way around, you end up with that, which is a bit of a pain. Right, when Paul's finished that little bit, I'm going to give him the challenging part of bending the coloured lines. Oh dear. Okay, this is one of those jobs that Paul has been doing this for quite a long time now, and he does nearly all this work, and nobody else has done very much, including myself, of this particular job. This is the bending arm, which is now up to 220 degrees, quite hot. There's a little saw cut in the side of the bending iron there. When you put one of these little lines in on edge, it supports the wood so it doesn't fall over. And as you bend it bit by bit, as Paul is going to do, you can hopefully make it the shape of a guitar. Bending it the other way is easy. Bending it this way is very difficult. On some of the more complex guitars, we bend quite a few pieces of wood that way. This one has a yellow line with a black line either side and the same at the back. That's easy to bend, that is not. So we have to bend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pieces of wood on edge to this sort of shape. Now he's going to come to the waist part, which is 10 times more difficult than the bit he's just done. And there might be a little bit of swearing involved here. Now, there are ways of making this a little bit easier. The things I showed you before, of bindings with a coloured line attached, that's one. But you can buy some of these lines, I can't find it now. Black, white, black, already glued together, which makes the bending a lot easier, that's a lot stronger. Or you can buy, there you go, black, red, black, so you can bend 3 all at one time. But that restricts us to what colours we can use. We had to order that in large quantities and buy it, have it imported. And the sizes aren't quite what I want. The red line is a bit too thick. So we tend not to do that. We tend to bend them one at a time. It gives us so much flexibility in colours and designs. That's one done, well done. So that's one. And that will go into that shape if you try hard enough. We'll need 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How many more? Another 7 or so to finish the guitar. And then, of course, we have to bend the bindings to suit the wooden bindings. Those are done on the bending formers and then again tweaked on this. Okay, just for fun, I thought I'd show off. I do like showing off little bits of metal. Those are 3 of the early bending formers, all with different heaters inside, different ways of applying the pressure. This is the latest one, which I'm still half building. This was bent by hand, just using brute force. That was used with a different type of brute force to that one, which is why that one's shiny and that one's not. But they're both the same shape, except where the cutaway is required. This is about 2 years old now, and I haven't yet got around to putting in the heaters or to putting in the end clamps. There's all sorts of sophistication I have in mind for that as soon as I can, but I need another lifetime. So that's that one. Let's have another one up, shall we? This is the other former with a cutaway. And then we have one Paul's going to bring across we use for the bazookas. Tuck it in as tight as you can, we've got a lot to get on. This one is for the tenor mandolas. This one for the... Oh, that's a tenor mandola, I do apologise. What's that one then? That's bazooka, okay. This one is for the mandolins. This one's for cutaways on guitars. These two you've already seen. Are you impressed? Benders. Hang on, found another one.